You're very welcome. Thank you very much to everybody for being here today. So yeah, I'm gonna present you basically what was my job market paper, the one that got me the job here at Corvinus. So it's entitled Signaling Effort, Information Structures in a Principal Agent Model, and that's co-written with Arseniy Samsonov, who is currently in Özyen University. So let me give you a little bit of background, right? So we're going to talk about an agency problem. What is that, right? It more or less portrays a misalignment in preferences between a principal and an agent. The principal would like the agent to expend some costly effort. And obviously, right, to achieve this end, the principal has to create an incentive for the agent to expend this costly effort. And how can the principal do this? Well, simply by committing before the agent chooses his effort level to a contract or a payment scheme. And the heart of the matter, usually in the literature, is on what to condition this contract. So just to clarify things now, what we do in the paper is that we suppose we have moral hazard in the sense that the effort is not observable, therefore not contractible. And we also suppose that the output is not contractible. Okay, so you'll see output will be extremely simple, non-stochastic, however, non-contractible. The only thing that really can be contracted upon are information messages. And what we assume in the paper is that actually two sources of information messages. One is the agent himself, and actually we will allow the agent to commit, so before the contract making stage, to, so whatever you want to call it, an information structure, an experiment. I will call that a signal in my instance, right? Yeah, so the agent can commit to a signal that will release later on messages depending on the effort he has expended. And we also suppose that there is a second source of messages that is absolutely outside the control of the agent. And this outside source of messages, we simply call it the outside signal. Okay, so basically what the principal will do is to design a contract that will be based on pairs of messages. Why pairs? Because you'll have a message coming from the agent signal and another message coming from this outside signal. So, you know, here's the motivation, right? A real world motivation for this. I think, frankly, that there would be several, but here's one that, let's say, is a bit compelling of what we do. So have in mind maybe a research collaboration between a university and a pharma company. So the idea, of course, is that, well, there may be indeed a misalignment in the preferences between the pharma company and the university. Researchers typically would, I guess, prefer to work on a groundbreaking vaccine, whatever you want to have in mind. A company, however, assuming that it's here to maximize profit, would rather have, you know, would rather maybe develop a weight loss pill, something that just generates cash. Why in that particular instance, you could think of the output as being non-contractible? Well, simply because, you know, the prospective profits are just too further down the line, right, to be contractible at all. What are these, you know, signals in this example, where you could think, for example, that the company, you know, explains to the university researchers that they will perform their own clinical trials, right, and think of these clinical trials as the outside signal, right? So the university cannot, you know, tamper with that. And we could also have an instance where the university commits to some sort of, you know, measurement of its research. So it could be anything, right? So a promise of certain research publications, a promise to file for a patent application, just having themselves their own clinical trials, whatever. So here are the research questions, the two main ones we focus on. The first thing is that, of course, from the agent's perspective, what would be an optimal signal? And the second question that is actually exciting is whether the principal always benefits from having, you know, more precise or more informative, let's say in a Blackwell sense, so more precise outside signals. And actually the answer turns out to be no. So but we'll see this in a minute. So I promise you to give you an overview of the results, but you know, because the way we model the problem is not that standard from an economic perspective, I would rather first please present to you the model and then give you the overview of the results, if that's okay with everyone. So here's the model, as simple as it could be. We have two risk neutral players, the principal and the agent. Okay, so here there's no problem of risk aversion on the agent side. The principal owns the technology, right, whose input is the agent's effort. Effort here can be either high, which is denoted by H, or low, which is denoted by L. So here's the misalignment in preferences. The principal would rather have the agent expend high effort simply because you see, right, the output generated by high effort is strictly greater. However, this high effort is costlier on the agent, okay? And of course, to avoid any trivialities, we suppose that the high effort is efficient, okay? So regarding, you know, like this contract that the principal will offer the agent. So as I said earlier, what we suppose in this model is that neither the effort nor the output are contractible. What will be contractibles are information messages. So again, as I said, there are two sources of, you know, information messages. The first one is the agent, right? So you can think of him as designing his own experiment, right? And that signal of the agent is denoted by pi a. And we also suppose that there may be an outside signal, right? An outside source of messages that escapes the agent's control. And this signal, we call it pi p. For today, I will present to you the version where those two signals are conditionally independent. However, we have an extension in the paper where that's no longer the case. So yeah, maybe that can be a ground for discussion later on. So let me really clarify what I mean by a signal. Yeah, sorry.
Just to understand really clearly what is it about here. The example that you gave about university and pharma company, it's not clear to me why you cannot write a contract. The pharma company can always say, I will give you a certain amount of research if you do this. You have to define a research project specifically. So even if you prefer to work on vaccine, but if it is about finding a drug to lose weight, so if you can clarify a little bit this aspect, just to follow more easily what is coming.
Sure. So maybe then another type of applications you could have in mind is the case where the principal doesn't understand output as a measure of effort, right? So, okay, the output is there. However, as a principal, I don't have the knowledge to interpret that and understand the correlation with your effort.
Okay.
Maybe that's a better, yeah.
Okay, so this is clear. Thank you.
Welcome. So yeah, let me define now what I mean by signal, because in the literature, there are so many different terminologies for this. What I mean is basically, right, it has two components. First, a set of information messages. So of course you'll have, because we have two signals, right, you'll have two different sets of messages for each signal, and a conditional probability distribution over messages, right? So those probability distributions, they're contingent on the agent's effort. So this is what I mean by a signal, okay? I have this assumption in the paper. The good news is that it's really without loss of generality. What we suppose is that the outside signal is binary, in the sense that you see here it has only two possible messages, right? Good news, which is 1, or bad news, which is 0. You could have a more general model in mind where there are several more messages. However, all the results carry through. So that's the good news about that assumption. And just to fix, right, the interpretation, please keep in mind this 1 is good news, the 0 bad news, meaning 1 is more likely under high effort, 0 is more likely under low effort. And what it will be very important is that there's always a possibility of a false positive. If that were not the case, then basically you could have a super simple contract that basically implements the full information equilibrium. That's the idea. That's why here we really require this assumption number 2. So hopefully now things are going to get clearer. Here's the timing with further assumptions. I'm going to try to motivate those. So the very first thing, right, at first, is that the principal and the agent observe this outside signal, this pi p. And the first to move is the agent. It chooses his own signal. Then at t=2, it's the contract making stage. So the principal will choose a contract that is contingent here on this joint signal. I will be denoting by Rij the payment that is contingent on the pair of messages Ij, I coming from the agent signal and J coming from this outside signal. And here are 2 extra assumptions, right? So that's why I wanted to give you the overview of the results after this slide. The first thing, right, this second bullet point tells you that a payment must never be less than some constant k, right? And k is weakly negative. So you can interpret this as like limited liability. What is standard in econ when we talk about limited liabilities to have k equal to 0. However, here we try to be a bit more general. Why we do this? Well, simply to make, more or less art costly on the principal, despite the agent's risk neutrality. The third bullet point tells you, right, that a negative payment, right, so think of it as a punishment, actually a fine against the agent, does not benefit the principal directly. Okay, so in the sense that only positive payments will enter, therefore negatively, the principal's payoff. So why we have this, just, to prevent having a very simple contract where the principal sells the project to the agent. Okay, so that's the reason why we have this. Then at t=3, right, the agent observes the contract and decides whether to accept or reject. In case of rejection, everybody goes home with a null payoff. If the agent accepts, then it chooses an effort level, either high or low, depending on this effort level, right? So we have a pair of messages that is realized, right? One message from the agent signal, the other from the outside signal. And payoffs are, realized accordingly. So the principal, right? So the first line on, those equations around the curly brackets, right, gives you the payoff of the principal. So it gets whatever output generated by the agent's effort and minus the positive payment, if positive, right? So minus the payment to the agent, given the pair of messages that's been realized. And for the agent, that's on the second line, the agent receives the payment, right? So if this is negative, well, that enters into the agent's payoff regardless, and minus the cost of expending this effort, X. So far, so good? All right. So so something that I want you to have in mind, sorry, let's go back to the timing, is that if you were to draw the extensive form, right? Well, every information set would be a decision node, right? Contains a single decision node. So here we have basically a game of perfect and complete information. Really, the only place where information is imperfect, right, is after the message is being realized, right? There's still uncertainty as of whether the effort was high or low, but because nobody else, right, is moving after that stage. That's why, right, in your extensive form, every information set contains a single decision node. So that's quite important, I guess, for understanding what we do next. So our equilibrium concept is the subgame perfect Nash equilibrium, and because of this, property of the game that it's a perfect and complete information, what really this subgame perfect Nash equilibrium entails is that we want optimal decisions at every decision node. we have this assumption that just, allows us to just restrict attention to pure strategies, that says that in case of indifference between two actions, a player chooses the action that the other player prefers. Okay, so that's that. So here's the overview of the results, right? So we will see together that in an equilibrium, the agent chooses an informative signal if and only if this outside signal exposes him to both a very likely and a severe punishment when he expends high effort. Okay, so the idea is that as an agent, I want to disclose information, right? Meaning commit to an informative signal only if and only if, if the principle were actually to not consider this signal of mine, I will receive a very low payoff. The second results I want to mention is regarding the value of an informative signal on the agent's end. So of course, the value of that would be to reduce inefficiencies. So today, in what I'm going to present, I'm just going to talk about the second source of inefficiency, which is on the second bullet point, which is that actually in informative equilibria, there will be no money burning on path, meaning the agent will never be fined when he expends a high effort. There's, however, a second source of, efficiency from having an informative signal on the agent's end, which is in the case where the outside signal would fail the principle to, would fail the principle to have the incentive to elicit this efficient effort, the high effort. I don't think I have time to talk about this, but if later in discussions you want to mention that, please feel free. So I'm just going to try to solve by backward induction, right? So remember, the last action to be chosen is for the agent regarding the effort level he wants to expend. And the first thing we show is that in every equilibrium, the agent will expend high effort, okay? So I don't want to spend too much time on that proof unless somebody is crazy curious about that. But something I want you to notice from this proposition is that an equilibrium therefore will be inefficient only if the agent gets punished on the equilibrium path, because is expending high effort. So if his need is punished, the equilibrium would be inefficient because this negative payment, remember, doesn't enter into the principal's payoff, right? So this will not be able to be cancelled out with the negative entry in the agent's payoff. So that would just basically reduce the surplus. So that slide now presents you with basically a family of contracts that are offered on path. So please do not read this proposition as a characterization of the principal's best response, right? It's not that, again, right? It's going to be contracts that will be offered on path, right? So specifically. So here we broke down our results into two cases, right? So let's go with first one. So the first one tells you that suppose that there is a message that the agent sends only if he expends high effort, right? So this is what this first sentence means. Well, then, right, it's easy for the principal to replicate the outcome of the full information equilibrium. You just condition your contract on this message, right? If you see it, you just offer a payment that leaves the agent indifferent between accepting and rejecting the contract. That's that. And this payment is obviously small enough to make sure that the principal just appropriate the whole surplus. That's it. The second case is where actually we do not have that instance, right? So every single message is sent with positive probability under low effort. And what we find is that an optimal contract is based on the joint signal. And then to read this contract, maybe if you have Milgram 1981 in mind, that will help, right? So here's like, you know, the first line of the curly brackets. The principal will inflict this maximum punishment K after any pair of messages that is bad news, meaning more likely under low effort. What she will do is to reward with a positive payment a single pair of messages among those which are, you know, the best news possible, meaning the most likely under high effort. As of the rest of the pairs, they will be rewarded with 0. Okay, so this results in, you know, on the second and third line really owes to the agent's risk neutrality. Okay, it wouldn't be risk neutral, we would have something different. Regarding the, you know, the functional form here of this positive reward R, just to find it, you just have to solve for the agent's incentive compatibility constraint. That's it. So you make it bind and you see what is this reward that makes this constraint bind. Okay, so now we're gonna start the most fun part, which is to think a little bit about the agent's problem of signal design. And I'm gonna ask you to consider the following contract, R hat. So R hat is only based on the outside signal, right? Totally disregards the agents. You'll see, we'll use it as a reference point for both the agent and the principal. And this is how the contract works. In case of message 0 being realized, meaning the bad news from the outside signal, the agent receives this maximum punishment K. And if the message is like good news, meaning 1 is realized, the agent receives a payment, right, that saturates its incentive compatibility constraint, meaning makes him indifferent between high and low effort. So something I want you to realize is that this contract is the least costly on the principal among all the contracts that are based on the public signal exclusively. Okay. And for today, although we don't have those assumptions in the paper, right, we will suppose 2 things. The first line tells you that this contract at heart is individually rational for the agent, meaning he prefers actually to accept it over rejecting it. The second line tells you that the contract is also individually rational for the principal, meaning she would rather have, you see here, right, this payoff, this Y minus the expected payment over, you know, designing a contract that the agent would rather reject. Okay, so this is what those 2 equations mean. So in this instance, we will use at heart as a reference point. Why is that? Because the principal, right, has always the option of disregarding the agent signal. And if she does so, right, she can guarantee herself this safe payoff, right, that you have on the second line. So now let's think a little bit in terms of the agent signal. So from the principal's viewpoint, right, because by disregarding this signal pi a, you can have here, right, this payoff on the second line. Well, you will, let's say, right, include the information contained in pi a only if, of course, it allows you to reduce your expected payment to the agent, right? Otherwise, you just can disregard the signal. So now, once that's said, let's move to the agent. Well, if by disclosing information, meaning making this pi a informative, you see here the second term decreases, meaning my expected payment as the agent will decrease. The only way I can benefit from disclosing this information is by reducing the third term here, which is your expected punishment. So hopefully that, you know, now makes sense in terms of the overview of the results I have shown you. Can I move on? Are there questions so far?
Any questions? No, I think you can continue.
Okay, great, thanks. So I'm going to show you now a result. So to be frank with you, in the proofs, this is an implication of whatever I'm going to show you later. However, for today's presentation, it just makes my life, and I think everybody's life, much easier. What the result says is that it's without loss of generality, that you can only restrict attention to signals for the agent that have only two messages. So those messages from now on, I will call them success and fail. Success being good news, meaning more likely under high effort, and fail being bad news, so more likely under low effort. Okay. So from now on, right, we will focus almost exclusively on the agent's problem of signal design. So remember, right, the principal will offer a contract that is based on the joint signal. And let's talk a little bit about the possible realizations of the joint signal, right? So success one would be the best news pair possible. And according to this contract I've shown you earlier, it will always be rewarded by this reward that I called R. Now, if you move to fail zero, that's the worst news possible, right? Bad news coming from both ends. And we know from the optimal contract that it will be always punished with this highest punishment K. So the heart of the matter really for the agent is to decide what to do with the two other realizations, right? Where basically you have mixed evidence, good news coming from one source and bad news coming from the other source. And I'm going to start talking about, this pair number 3. So we have good news from the agent signal, but bad news from the outside signal. And what I'm going to try to convince you about is that an optimal informative signal will actually render this mixed evidence, right, success zero, neutral news. What I mean by this is that equally likely under high and low effort, okay? So to see a little bit the argument, let's proceed by, let's say contradiction. So suppose that success zero is non-neutral news. So you see on the first line, it's either strictly good news, meaning more likely under high effort, or strictly bad news, so more likely under low effort. Okay, so pick either case, doesn't make a difference. What I want you to realize, and that's the bulk of the argument here, is that if it's not neutral news, you will be able to garble your success message for free, more or less. There will be no, bad consequences for you from this garbling of the success message. And because of this, right, let's say if you're indeed able to garble the success message without any bad consequences, then you will force the principal to pay you more after this success one, this best realizations possible. So here's the argument. Suppose it's non-neutral news. You garble the success message by simply increasing its probability when you expand low effort. You increase it still in a way to, leave this likelihood ratio of the success message in its current interval. Why does this matter? Because if you leave it in the same interval, you will not change the optimal payments the principal will give you after after all pairs of messages that are not success one. That's the idea. That's why, I was saying, let's say you can garble the success message without any bad consequences, meaning now you don't have a situation where a pair previously was not fined, but now it's fined, right? So we don't want that situation. And it's always possible if actually success zero is not neutral news. So suppose, right, that, so remember, as long as this likelihood ratio remains in the interval, the payments for, fail zero, fail one, and success zero, will not change. The only thing that may change is actually the payment after this success one pair. So suppose that this payment doesn't change, right? So this is what I mean by holding R constant, this payment you receive after the best news success one. Well, because you haven't changed this probability distribution contingent on high effort, well, you expect the same payoff from high effort. However, now you expect a higher payoff from low effort, simply by virtue that you release good news more often and therefore bad news less often. So the idea is that, right, the original contract was just making you barely indifferent between high and low effort. So now in virtue of those changes, the previous contract makes you strictly prefer low effort over high effort. And the only way in which the principal can realign your preferences towards preferring the high effort is by increasing the reward she offers you after good news. And because of this, of course, the deviation is profitable. So that's the idea. You want this good news message from the agent's signal to be as noisy, meaning you want to garble it to the fullest extent, but without it being bad news. So we have dealt with this success zero, so it will be neutral news, and by the optimal contract, it will be rewarded with zero. So now the thing we have to tackle is this last realization, fail one. So you see there are two possible interpretations of fail one. Either it will be bad news, right, in the sense that it's more likely under low effort, and according to the optimal contract, the principal will punish this with this maximum punishment K. Or it is not bad news, so either neutral news or good news, but it will be rewarded with zero, okay, simply because it's not the best news pair. And if it's not bad news, it means that the likelihood ratio of fail is in this interval, meaning fail one is not bad news, period. So, sorry, what I want to show you here in that slide is the following thing. So regardless in which case you are, let's say, right, whether fail one is bad news or not bad news, right? You want this likelihood ratio of your failed message to be as low as possible given the interval in which it belongs. Why is that? Because we'll see in a minute, that will imply a trade-off, but that will allow you more or less to reduce the likelihood of punishment on path. This is why you want this this likelihood ratio of the fail message to be as low as possible. So again, we're going to work by contradiction, but here I'm just going to take, one of the two possible instances. So suppose that fail is always bad news, right? So even with message one, that's find up to this K, maximum punishment. And remember, you want this fail message to be as precise as possible. So if that's not the case, it means that your likelihood ratio is strictly comprised between the two bounds. And so for us, it's strictly greater than zero. So here, actually, instead of garbling your message fail, you will do the opposite. You will make it more precise, and in the following way. So you will reduce its likelihood when you expend high effort, increase its likelihood when you expend low effort, but not in any way possible. You will not alter the likelihood ratio of the success message, and you will obviously decrease the likelihood of your fail message. So again, why is it important not to alter the likelihood ratio of your success message? Because I do not want, to, let's say, I do not want to change the principal optimal payments after the pairs that are not this pair success one, okay? So again, if the likelihood ratio of success doesn't change, the pairs fail zero, fail one, success zero will be rewarded the same way as they used to be before the deviation. Okay, so if anything changes in the principal contract, it's only this positive payment contingent on success one. So let's think a bit about how the deviation affects the agent. I guess that it's pretty obvious from here, right? The fact that the probability of fail contingent on high effort has diminished, that on path, remember you expend high effort and therefore you face punishment less, right? Now, let's think a little bit about how the principal will adjust her contract. So as I said, because of, this consistency in the likelihood ratio of success, she will only change the reward contingent on success one. And here, basically what happens after the deviation, I guess, right, it's pretty clear, is that you have a higher incentive to expend high effort, right? Let's say if the principal were not to change her positive payment, well, now unconditional on high effort, you receive it more often, you're less often punished, right? And when you expend low effort, it's the other way around, right? So you receive the reward less often and you're punished more often. So therefore, right, what it means is that now you have a much stronger incentive to expend high effort. And of course, the principal, therefore, will adjust optimally by reducing this reward that she offers you after good news. So from the agent's perspective, therefore, right, there is a trade-off between these bullet points number 1 and 2, right? So on the one hand, you have decreased your reward, but on the other hand, you have decreased your expected punishment. And what we find is that actually the first effect always dominates the second, meaning whatever gain in utility you get by reducing your expected payment, that is superior to the loss in utility that comes from this reduced reward. So that's that, right? In a nutshell, you want to make your fail message as precise as possible, given its interpretation, this for the sake of avoiding punishment on the equilibrium path. And here are the main results. So I'm sorry that looks messy, but it's pretty straightforward. So we have basically two cases in the end that can unfold in an equilibrium. So either, right, so sorry, if you have both conditions here holding, so meaning you see, right, the outside signal releases a lot of false negative, meaning this pi p0 given h is large, right? And this maximum punishment is like, superior to some bound, so above a certain bound. Then every equilibrium will be informative in the sense that the agent signal, is informative. And in particular, the great thing about it is that it's informative in a way that actually renders the equilibrium efficient, meaning we won't have any money burning. So here's how the equilibrium, the agent chooses actually to reveal low effort with the message H, right? So meaning this message fail will only be produced when the agent has shirked. That's that. And of course, the success message, right, will not be bad news, but garbled, enough to maximize the reward that the principal pays after good news. The principal bases her, so she strictly prefers to base her contract on the joint signal. Of course, she punishes fail whenever she sees it, because fail is an indicator of low effort without any uncertainty. Success 0 is neutral news, right? Remember by the previous steps, and therefore will be rewarded 0. And the principal rewards this best news pair success 1 with this reward R. And if you want, its exact form, just solve for the incentive compatibility constraint. So that's that, right? The strength, let's say, or the peculiarity of this equilibrium is that it's informative and there is no money burning. Then basically, if either of those two conditions, right, doesn't hold, meaning either there are only few false negative, or the this biggest punishment possible is actually not that severe, then every equilibrium is uninformative, right? So that's that. Here in bullet point 1, you have a typical case of an uninformative signal. And the principal weakly prefers, to disregard that signal because it doesn't carry any additional information compared to the outside one. So you can think that just, she goes with designing, a contract only based on that public signal. And yeah, so anytime she sees message 0, the principal finds the agent up to this K. And if she sees 1, which is good news, she offers the reward that leaves the agent indifferent between high and low effort. In that type of equilibria, well, first, they're all inefficient, right? Why is that? Because we have money burning. So meaning, remember, on path, the agent always expend high effort. However, here, right, there's a positive probability of him being punished, which is this pi p0 given h. And why is that a source of inefficiency? Remember, because the surplus, so like the joint surplus, right, the sum of the two payers won't equal the maximum surplus possible when a high effort is expended, just because, this negative, so this fine K will enter into the agent's payoff, but not in the principal. So therefore, it would just reduce the maximum surplus, right, the first best surplus by exactly K. In terms of comparative statics, so maybe I'm just going to go quickly over it. I don't know if you, Georges, if you want me to leave some time for questions, maybe.
I mean, do whatever you plan to do, and we'll see if we have some questions, but mainly clarification question, I guess.
Okay.
But please
okay.
proceed.
Okay, thank you. Some comparative statics. So the first is with respect to the cost of effort. So what we find is that actually when you get the functional form of this, positive reward, well, it depends positively on the cost of effort, right? That's intuitive. And I don't know if you remember that from the previous steps, but if you increase the reward, right, that gives a weaker incentive for the agent to escape punishment. Therefore, a weaker incentive to reveal information. Because remember here, the incentive for the agent to reveal this information is to escape punishment. So that will actually be good for the agent and bad for the principal, because the principal will have to increase her reward. So she has to increase it. So here you see in the two types of possible instances, either because, let's say, right, so either when the agent will not change his signal, but because this cost enters positively into the reward, she'll have to increase it. And something even worse that could happen is that the increase in this cost of effort motivates the agent to switch signal from, of course, right, it will only go in one direction, from an informative one to an uninformative one. And obviously, right, the less informative the signal, the more the principal has to pay the agent. So not surprisingly, right, you have the opposite result with this maximum punishment, right? So if the principal has access to more severe punishment, it will always provide, the agent with at least a weak incentive to improve the informativeness of his signal, right? So if the agent, right, changes signal towards a more informative one, that's really good for the principal because she can reduce her payment. And even in the case where the agent would not change signal, we find that actually this maximum punishment, right, so it enters negatively into the expression of the reward the principal pays. So in either case, the principal will be able to reduce, what she pays the agent. And I think the last bullet point is, I would say, the most interesting one of the paper, actually. So what we were trying to think about with my co-author is whether the principal would always benefit from having, access to more precise outside signals. So more precise in a Blackwell sense, right? More informative signals in a Blackwell sense. And unfortunately, that may not actually increase the principal's payoff. Why is that? Because it could be that you have two outside signals. So let's say one is more informative than the other. However, this more informative signal has also a lower likelihood of false positive. And remember, the incentive for the agent to provide information is to escape punishment. However, if you decrease this likelihood of punishment on path, the agent may actually want to switch to a signal that is less informative. And in that case, right, and if that happens, actually the principal will be worse off by virtue of the fact that she will have to increase the payment she gives the agent. That's that. I just have like 2 slides about the literature. I don't know if you're interested. Maybe, yeah. So the thing, really, I tried very much not to talk about or not relate our paper with is Bayesian persuasion. Why is that? Because, in our model, this experiment that the agent designed is only here to provide incentives, right, to the principal. However, it's not about, tampering with the inference of the principal. Why is that? Because, in classic Bayesian persuasion, the receiver cannot commit to how she reacts to those information messages. So therefore, the value of the experiment is in terms of, how it changes the posterior belief of the receiver compared to its prior belief. However, here, we do not have such a thing. Why is that? Because the receiver commits to how she will react to the information messages. So in light of this, comment, there is a great paper by Bolelavsky and Kim, which basically, encompass both this idea that the agent experiment is valuable in terms of the incentives it provides and the inference it provides to some other parties. So they have a very elegant model where basically the sender designs an experiment based on the effort of a third party, and those two people have the same preferences of the receiver's action. And but the receiver cannot commit to how she reacts to those information messages. There's been a similar approach as ours, but not in the context of moral hazard, but in the hold-up problem. That's a paper by Condorelli and Sentes. It's a bit further from what we do, but yeah. And there are also like 2 papers that are, let's say, the most related. So there's a paper by Babish and co-authors. What they do is that they characterize all equilibrium payoffs achievable by the agent, given some information structure about effort. So we have very similar setups, just, we study very different questions. That's that, and absolutely brilliant paper by Georgiadis and co-authors that is very recently published. So they did what we hoped with my co-author to be smart enough to do, which is they go back to the more canonical exposition of the moral hazard problem, where the output is stochastic, and they actually allow the agent to design the distribution of output contingent on effort. So yeah, let's say they can complement each other, but yeah. That's that on my side. Thanks a lot. And if you have questions, I'll be very happy.